Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Brian Morse. I'm the host of the Full Stack .chat podcast. Today, I have Connor Murphy with me here today, who's a full stack developer and content creator. We're going to be talking about his product, Doify, which is a platform that adds some more advanced automations to users of the Todoist product, of which I am a big fan of. So, Connor, why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm, as you mentioned, they're a content creator, full stack developer, build products on my side, like to build kind of just cool things, find issues, build products to fix them. And then alongside that, just kind of make content, share the struggles of being a software engineer, have tips for improving and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So what I do with starting these chats off is just as a means to kind of get to know each other, because we have a little bit of an intro section before I hit the go live button, but it's not enough to really, I guess, break down a little bit of those barriers and ease into the conversation. So we're gonna start with an icebreaker question. What is something that you like to do on the side that our audience wouldn't expect you to like to do? Something unique, different, interesting. Got any
That's a
interesting
good
hobbies?
question. Um, I mean, besides kind of just building products, Keen Runner, if you can go for that. I used to build
Oh, nice.
keyboards a lot, but I think that's quite a popular one as a keyboard.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I used to build them, and then yeah, kind of just techie at heart now. Network, sysadmin stuff, all that good fun. Mostly just
Yeah,
development stuff though, and
it's kind
gaming.
of
Everyone,
interesting.
everyone likes gaming.
You'd
um,
be surprised. There are so many people I talk to that have like not as at least in tech that don't get into gaming, but I'm an avid gamer myself.
no, yeah, massive
Um,
gamer.
we'll have to talk more about that after the show. I'd be interested in knowing what you're into. Okay, so let's get on to the main topic of today's chat. So, what is Doify? I went through the website and kind of glanced through some of the features that are available, or it looks like you're in the waitlist period, so people are signing up for a waitlist for the product. But
Yeah,
again, I'm a productivity nerd. I've tried pretty much every tool under the sun as far as making my life a little more streamlined. And Todoist is one of those tools that's kind of I always seem to come back to is in my tool chain. So what is Doify, and what kind of things can users add to Todoist that it does not natively support it?
yeah. So I like you, big kind of productivity nerd, and I fell into the kind of realm of Todoist probably a few years ago, and I've used it for years now. And then kind of realized there's a few kind of issues as they've added product like features to their product, which are just kind of things I wish it did. So for example, if you make like a board or a Kanban board, as everyone calls it, they just call it a board in their product. But then you complete a task, there's no way of automatically moving those tasks. Like this is a big one for me. So I like keep a say like a reading project, and I'll have books in like to read in like reading and then completed. But if you're in reading and you're like, oh, I just tick that off because it's complete now, it can't, there's no way of automatically jumping that to the end. So you just end up with all these completed tasks in one section, and you're kind of just like, and then to move them, you have to manually uncomplete it, move it, then recomplete it. But then if you care about the karma stats and stuff like that on there, that messes with all them because you're now uncompleting a previous task and then recompleting on a different day. So it gets a bit messy like that. So I kind of just wish, I always wish there was a product which would let you complete it, and then it kind of intercepts that, and then it'll automatically uncomplete it, move it, and recomplete it for you. And that's what kind of Doify will do. That's one of the big features. Outside of that, there'll just be other stuff like kind of rules. That'll be the underlying principle for that. So instead of just when I complete this, move the column it's in, it might be stuff like, oh, if I assign a label, then automatically set the priority, or if I do this, do Y, and just have that kind of functionality around it. So they're like kind of the big tasks, and then on top of that, I want to do things like analytics and them kind of more stat nerdy, interesting things. But the main thing is like kind of the rules and processing tasks in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's not building some kind of rules or automation engine is definitely a small feat. I mean, I think a lot of people who are building products, a lot of what they focus on, at least in my experience, is they focus on the front end, like what looks cool and pretty. But in order to build a really good automation engine, you have to really have an intimate understanding of like building back end technologies, at least from my understanding. So let's can you tell a little bit about how like what are you using to power the service behind the scenes?
Um,
What's the stack look like?
so at the minute, the stack is Remix for the front end. I'm a big Next lover, but got persuaded, so I was going to try Remix for this.
Okay.
So far, I've been loving it. Then I'm using Neon for the database, which is just a serverless Postgres kind of platform, and then using the Drizzle for the ORM, or Drizzle ORM for the ORM between them. Styling it with Tailwind, hosting it on Vercel, and then there's going to be probably a few other things in there which I'll throw in like Vercel, not Vercel, AWS.
Okay.
So that's kind of like them. That's the main kind of stack. So kind of a lot of new things in here I haven't used before. Like stuff I normally default to using like Dynamo in my products and doing like a NoSQL database. So for this, I tried something new. I was like, I want to do relational. It's very relational data. So I found Neon. I was going to use PlanetScale. Then they removed their free tier number of weeks ago now. So I was like, all right, not
I'm
using
familiar.
PlanetScale. Yeah. And then I was like, right, let's look for alternatives. And then I saw Neon mentioned. So I was like, all right, let's go with Neon. And so far they've been great. Yeah. And then, like I said, Remix has been great as well. And that's kind of
Awesome.
the underlying stack at the minute.
So is Remix pretty much the main thing that processes like I imagine you need a way to handle when events trigger
Yeah.
inside of a Todoist, like somebody does, like using the example you talked about earlier. Someone completes a task, your app needs to be notified of that. What is being used to kind of gather those, or at least aggregate, ingest is the better word. What's being used to ingest those events and then process them? Is that still Remix, or is there something else you got
Yeah,
going on?
so Todoist emit webhooks for every single like
Okay.
event completed. So then we just listen to those webhooks and subscribe to them inside Remix, and then we just process them in the back end. At the minute, it's all in Remix. I have kind of flirted with the idea of moving it to like an API gateway Lambda kind of setup. I probably won't do that, but that was something I did kind of cross the path of and think maybe I should do this, just to kind of offload it from Remix. But then kind of simplicity won, and I was like, I just want to build the MVP as quick as possible. Let's not
Yeah.
overcomplicate this. So yeah, it's all just listening to webhooks inside of Remix, basically.
Yeah, I think I like that you called yourself out on that, because I'm exactly the same way. I mean, we talked a little bit before we went live, and we're both former sysadmin networking types too. So it's so tempting to just kind of like dig into all the back end stuff
Yeah.
and try and like overcomplicate it and streamline it too early. So I think it's good. I've done that so many times. Like I built my one, I wouldn't call it a successful app or service, but it's my one launched app service is like this overcomplicated mess of like lambdas and multiple API gateways.
Yep.
And I think I've got a couple of SQS queues in there in order to process things as they like move through the system. And then I look back on it as like, why didn't I just do all this in Next? Because it totally could handle probably 90% of the use cases, and I overcomplicated it. But for those learning, I think there's good value as well in trying new things like you're doing with Neon by building a relational database. I mean, the approaches to relational versus non-relational. There are some things that are shared, some concepts and ideas that are shared, but you got to think about the data a little bit differently. So I think that's great.
That was the big thing for me, was kind of, like I said, I normally default to Dynamo and then I followed the single table design. I can't remember, it's like Alex, I can't remember his last name now, does the single table design philosophy. And basically you shouldn't have multiple tables, and you should try and use as few kind of global secondary indexes as possible. And it's great and it works, but you have to very much think of your data up front. And then in this case, when I was doing it for Doify, I was just like, this content or this data is like way too relational, and I need to query it in so many different ways for this product that like just putting it all in one table in Dynamo, there probably is a way, and someone who's a lot better at Dynamo and a lot smarter with Dynamo can probably figure it out. But in this case, I was like, you know what? I don't normally use relational databases. Let's try something and use that. I definitely agree with you on like the kind of trying new things to learn things. So for like, I mainly learned AWS when I built my first SaaS product called Harken. That like taught me so much about AWS and like Lambda and Event Bridge and scheduling events and all of that stuff. So I highly recommend like building a SaaS to learn something like that.
Yeah, that's great. So what was kind of the inspiration behind building Doify? Was it, I mean, you had mentioned earlier that a lot of it was like lack of things, or at least the perceivable lack of things that the Doist team was adding into to Doify or Todoist, and you wanted to build something that would kind of bridge those gaps. And you built something for yourself. What made you decide to turn it into a product?
Mainly it was just because I knew I had these issues. So whenever I have like in like one of these kind of products and I'm just like, oh, I have this annoyance or this problem, I know others probably will too. So it kind of just screams like this is ready to make a product out of it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be some massive uber successful product, but like there's probably other people interested. And this kind of got validated for me because I was looking through the Todoist subreddit, and like I was going, a lot of these posts you see on there are very much like, oh, if you could add one thing to Todoist, what would it be? What do you wish they added? And a lot of these kind of posts were coming up, and I was just kind of scrolling through the comments, and I constantly saw these features that I wish were in there, and I was like, well, what? I'm a developer. Let's go try build it.
I'm a developer. Let's go try build it. I think that's the motto
Yeah,
for all indie hackers, right? Like you just see
yeah,
there's some weird edge case that, I mean, not necessarily in your case, but in things that I've seen, I'll see this weird edge case that like maybe myself and two other people are experiencing, and it's like I could make a product out of this. Let's just go ahead and build it
yeah.
ourselves.
Let's go do it. I've had
Yeah,
so many things like that where I was just like, let's go try build. I'm pretty well. My first SaaS product, I didn't even validate it by seeing if other people experience the issue. I was just like, I have this issue. I wish it existed. Let's go build it.
yeah,
So that kind of worked. And then like I had a little product in the middle, which didn't really go anywhere. But that kind of was a similar kind of I wish it was a product. Let's go make it. Um, so yeah, I
yeah.
think it's the best way to start when it comes to trying to build a new product idea. Is if you have that problem, you have that issue, then others probably will too.
Yeah, but I do also like that you called out searching through Reddit comments, and I guess
Mm.
that could go across any social media or forums.
Yeah,
If you're trying, I think validating a product and idea is extremely important, because if nobody, you could build something and sink tons of time into it, but if no one else cares about it, then it's like, are you wasting your time in doing it? And if you're doing it for the sake of learning, I mean, that's still, you're still getting value out of it. I mean, I think there's still some value that can uh, be gathered even if your product is not launched and successfully, because like you said with your first one, you learned a ton about AWS,
yeah,
and that was
yeah,
my experience with the product I had mentioned earlier. Like I knew enough about AWS to like make these little things, but I was like, I want to make something that is like substantial and
yeah,
production grade inside of AWS. So like, let's shove as much complexity into this thing as possible.
yeah.
And now I regret that and want to go just do it next and Vercel.
Keep
But
it
I guess
simple.
yes, but now I have that. Now I have that knowledge, so I can make an educated decision.
That's
So
kind of how I
what are
find you start with like, I want to learn as much as possible. So you make it really complex, and then you realize actually I don't want this complex because then I need to manage this. And it's like this kind of graph which then like comes down.
yeah.
It's like let's make it really complex so I learn everything. Actually, no, I want this as simple as possible.
Yeah, I did something similar. We're going on a bit of a tangent here, but like when I got my website off of WordPress, because I've been using WordPress for my website for like at least a decade, right? And then I'm finally like, I want to do something interesting and unique. So I chose Gatsby, and everyone who was using Gatsby at the time was hosting on Netlify, which seemed like the natural pairing. But
Yeah,
I'm like, I want to see how far I can push AWS. This was like my first step into really
yeah,
getting
yeah,
into AWS. And I did a very similar thing. And like I built it and I threw it out there. And then every time I'd run into these like little weird bugs, it would take me hours to try and like sift through and figure it out. And I was like, I just want to publish a damn blog post. Like
yeah.
this shouldn't be such a huge barrier. So I eventually went back to Gatsby and Netlify. But again, now I know, now I know that this is definitely the better approach for something like a simple
The
website.
amount of times I've like driven myself insane from like AWS stuff. Like I know this is a massive tangent, but I distinctly remember writing a blog post about how to like publish Docker containers to run an API on like AWS using Fargate. And because I'm running it on like an M series MacBook, it compiles it to an ARM version
Yep.
Docker container. And then I'm
Yep.
trying to
I know
publish
that.
it on AWS, which is running in like was it 64 bit
Yeah.
and it's just I am AMD 64, and it was constantly giving me these errors, and I was like, "Why are you erroring?" And I was like, "Oh wait, it's because it's building out an entirely different architecture." And I spent like 2 hours just to realize I need to change build to
Yep.
AMD 64. Yeah,
That's like the ultimate version of works on my machine, because it does.
yeah,
It
it
literally
literally
works
does.
on your
Yeah,
machine.
just you'll forget you're running on a different machine.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've learned so many things. Like for AWS is just such a good way of like just learning stuff because you can just build all these different projects. So like building SaaS products like taught me a ton on AWS. Hosted a game server on there once, that taught me a lot.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was like we can talk about that after, but it was basically a Minecraft server which ran in a Docker container, and then it has like a DNS server which points to it, and then whenever you ping the DNS, it auto updates. So you ping the DNS, that goes through to start the Docker container, then we get the public IP of the Docker container and update an A record or a record in
Mhm.
the DNS, so then you can connect to the server. It's really cool.
Yeah,
But again,
that's
in a
cool.
network node coming out there.
Yeah, yeah, you built your own version of dynamic DNS. I love it. All right, so so now that we're beyond our nerding out about AWS, what are some challenges you faced along the way from taking your idea of Doify from, just this thing in your brain and getting it into something of a workable state, so this way others can potentially use it as well?
Okay. The first one, which I think I encountered, which I kind of weren't expecting to, but I did, is getting like married to a technology. Which probably
Ooh,
isn't a
that's a good one.
common one. Yeah, it's not really a common one, but everyone's like, "Oh, pick a stack, use a stack, own that stack, and build your product with that. Don't waste time like learning new things." And I was like, "Well, I'm most comfortable, as I mentioned earlier, using Dynamo. Let's try build Dynamo. Everything I want to do is use Dynamo because it's such a great database." And then I started building with it, and I was like, and started planning it out. And I was just like, actually, this doesn't really work for what Dynamo's good at. This just isn't what Dynamo. And then I was like, well, now I need to go look for a new one. And I was like, if I was too married to Dynamo at the beginning, so I spent like a week trying to make Dynamo work. And I was like, well, I could have just abandoned ship earlier on that, picked a product like Neon where it does work, or another, relational database, and then just started building straight away. Um, but like I got too married to kind of Dynamo for that week. So I was like, don't get, realize, use all the technologies you want to use and that you love using and you're good at using. But when it doesn't work, and you don't be afraid to be like, yeah, this doesn't work, and then pick something that does work. That's like the first one, which really stuck to me. And then the second one, which is everyone probably kind of comes across, is like we mentioned earlier, not over engineering it. Like Todoist have like webhooks, and then they also have a thing called a sync API. So their whole thing is you should like sync your product or sync your database with their API, like say once every day or every 2 days, and get a complete copy of their data, and then you can use that data to build your app. But in my case, I was like, I don't really need that. I just need the webhooks to notify me in real time. So like
Yeah.
I didn't want to. I was thinking, oh, maybe the original plans, if I went and looked at them, was like, let's sync the product every day, and then we'll get these webhook events. Then we'll compare the webhook events, store them to the sync API to make sure we validated every single thing and we didn't miss any events. And then we can and I was like, this is just way overcomplicating for what I need. Like I'm building a full like webhook replay system. like this just isn't needed. So let's just dumb it down, and work on that.
Yeah, and
So
I
that was
think
kind of the big
ultimately,
thing.
when you add all sorts of complexities, it your users don't even necessarily know, right? Like
No.
you could
Yeah.
build all this stuff behind the scenes and make this like super incredibly beautiful system. And I say beautiful, and it's kind of strange even saying that 'cause we're talking about technology being beautiful, but I'm sure everyone knows what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And no one knows. All they do is see the pretty, the pretty website, and
Yeah.
click the buttons and do what they need to do. So I think it's a good call out. Okay, let's. I got one final question for you before we wrap this thing up. What if you had one piece of advice beyond the challenges you faced along the way for builders, for indie hackers who are looking to kind of get into space? They want to, start working on their first product. What would that piece of advice be?
I think my bit of advice for people who are starting out indie hacking would probably be, and this might be controversial, but try not to worry about the business side too soon. I can't, it's rich for me to say that because I'm not like super successful. I've built several products. None of them are making me a ton of money or anything. But at the same time, like I think if you get too hung up on the business and it's like, oh, what should my domain name be? What should this policy be? What should my refund this be? What percentage am I going to charge on that? You get hung up in all of that, you probably just miss building the product. And then like, especially if you're just starting out and you've not built like a SaaS product before, you've not built any kind of product with like, you're going to learn so much. You want to really dive into that building. I realize there's people who are probably a lot more experienced in the business side of things and who are more successful than me and are going to like disagree straight away. But from my experience, it's just like, try and build an MVP and get some people using that before you worry about what your domain name is and what you should be charging and, the more kind of financial side of it. Like make sure you have a core product offering which is validated and good.
Yeah, I think the trolls on Twitter would probably have a big fit over what you just said, but I do think there's some truth in that,
Yes.
especially
That's
if it's your first one,
yeah.
because like you're not even going to know what you don't know until you start building
Yeah.
something. Like most people who get started in this, I talk to builders all the time, even outside of the podcast, and most people who get started on this, they always call back and say marketing is definitely one of the big things. But I think the
Yeah.
reason that people say that marketing and in relating it back to this, the business side of things is super important is because they've built that first thing. They've taken the first step,
Yeah.
And I've heard from authors just listening to other podcasts that everyone says that your first book is not going to be great, but it's your
Yeah.
first one, right? So it's kind of like that. It's that wall that you have to push through in order to
Yeah.
like learn the nitty gritty of what you don't know and then start skilling up from there. So I love that advice. I think it's great.
That's kind of
Well, with
it's
that,
the same. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna
I'm
say it's
sorry.
the same for yeah, like content and stuff as well. Like because I do like
Yeah.
loads of content creation. I get so hung up on like, and I still happen now. If I make a YouTube video, I compare it to people who have been doing YouTube, for 4 or 5 years, really experienced, great tech, like they know their skills inside out, and they're producing these top tier videos. And I'm like, oh, why can't I do that? And then you realize, well, I'm still at the beginning. I need to push through this bit of I need to make. You have to make kind of crap videos before you can make good videos,
Yeah.
and like I suppose that's sorry, it's just another piece of advice is also try not to compare yourself to like people who are 4 or 5 years down the road, built 20 SaaS products and are making $1 million a year or whatever, because they've been there, they've failed 100 times. You're still at the beginning. Like try and learn from them, but don't beat yourself up that you're not at that point.
Yeah, it's not a good call out. I love that. Okay, Connor, where can people find you if they want to follow you, if they want to see your work? I'm going to go ahead and toss up a link to, or at least the
Yeah, yeah.
URL for Doify. I think I got that right. So if you're interested in, if you use Todoist and are interested in adding some of these automations, go ahead and sign up for the waitlist there. But where else can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter at Mr. Connor Murphy. Annoyingly, I couldn't get Connor Murphy. The account's been suspended. Don't know why. But yeah, so it's Mr. Connor Murphy on Twitter or just connormurphy.com. I'm on YouTube, Connor Murphy. Basically, if you search Connor Murphy on like Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, you'll find me. Or connormurphy.com for my blog, which is mostly AWS stuff, I'll admit. Occasionally other stuff. But if you're definitely interested in AWS, that's probably the best place to go for my content.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love AWS, so I'm definitely gonna be checking it out. If anyone is watching the recap of this on YouTube, check the description down below. I will add links to everything that Connor had mentioned in today's podcast. And with that, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Once again, my name is Brian Morrison. You can find me on Twitter at BrianMMDev, or pretty much anywhere at BrianMMDev. And I will see you in the next episode of the Full Stack Chat podcast. Thank you so much, Connor, for coming on and chatting with
No
us
worries.
today. And
Thank you for having me.
have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.